Leonard Nelson, America's first serial sex killer necrophiliac. Earl Leonard Nelson, born Earl Leonard Ferial, on the 12th of May 1897 in San Francisco, California. To parents James Ferrell, a Spanish immigrant, and Frances Nelson, of Scandinavian background. The two got together in their late teens. Frances' parents disagreed with their relationship. They tried always to keep Frances away from James, but she wouldn't listen to them. Not long after they got together, Frances fell pregnant. When her family found out, they wouldn't have anything to do with her. Their religion was against sex outside wedlock. They lived by the book which states sex outside wedlock. Even thinking about it was evil. James and Frances got married before she had the baby. They rented an apartment and set up home, but it wasn't long before the marriage started going wrong. James would stay out all night, most of the time, and he would spend all the money on prostitutes and drink. When James didn't have any money and he wanted sex from Frances, he would push her about and take it. When Frances was about 19, James decided to leave her on her own and pregnant with no family to turn to. However, the people in the community found out Frances was in trouble with the rent, so they come together and helped her. On the 12th of May 1897, Frances gave birth to Earl on her own in hospital. She was told due to her having syphilis she couldn't breastfeed, and she should think herself lucky that Earl wasn't affected by the syphilis because she had broken scabs around her vagina where Earl passed through. Frances herself was treated for her syphilis, but it did no good. The syphilis was in a very advanced stage. Frances started drinking a lot due to pain. The drink helped ease it somewhat. She would only buy baby formula now and again, so Earl was hungry all the time. Frances didn't have any time for Earl. She would leave him crying all the time while he was in his cot. One day the baby cried non-stop for hours. The landlord got worried, so he let himself into Frances' apartment, and unfortunately to his horror he found Frances dead. She had died from syphilis. What she had caught it from her husband James. He caught syphilis from a prostitute. Frances was 20 years old at the time of her death. James died around the same time of the same complaint, 1897. At this time Earl was 2 years old and was taken in by his grandparents Jenny and Lars, who themselves had 5 children. They lived at 3525 20th Street in San Francisco, California. Lars and Jenny were Pentecostals, a religion that didn't believe in sex before marriage. They believed that sex before marriage was evil. Even if you thought about it, that was a sin. Earl nearly died at the age of 9 of dysphoria. On April 18, 1906, San Francisco, California was struck by the worst earthquake America had known. 8% of the city was destroyed. There were fires that broke out all over the place that wall didn't go out. Earl saw the fear in the woman's eyes, and the women could see the pleasure of seeing the fear in his eyes, even at his young age. One day Earl was out on his bike and got hit by a car. Unfortunately, he got a head injury. He was in a coma for 6 days. When he awoke, his grandmother took him to the yard and hosed him down to get all the scum from his body. Earl recovered physically, but mentally he wasn't the same. He would suffer from bad headaches, so bad that Earl would go and sit in the cellar where it was dark. He also had bad memory loss. At 7 years old, Earl was expelled from school because he would carry an old Bible around with him all the time. He would talk to people that weren't there and recited scriptures that talked about the beast. Due to his beliefs, Earl wouldn't eat food that was prepared for him. He would get the scrapes, throw them on a plate, then smother all the food in olive oil and eat the food like a dog. Earl's granddad would buy Earl clothes, and Earl would go and swope them for rags, which didn't please his granddad. At 12 years old, Earl took to masturbating all the time. He would also steal alcohol to ease the pain in his head. He was very afraid with all the things he would do that God might think he was evil and God was going to strike him down. Earl's grandmother died and his granddad couldn't look after him anymore, so he was sent to live with his Aunt Lillian and her husband. When Lillian had friends around and Earl didn't like them, he wouldn't speak to them. Sometimes he would pick things up with his teeth and he would walk on his hands in front of them. He had large hands and feet. When Earl was 16, his aunt and uncle gave him an allowance. He would go down to the town and buy drink, and he would also go with prostitutes. He always went with the elder ones. He was quite violent with them, but to them it was money. After visiting there at one point, he caught syphilis, but being embarrassed, he didn't get any treatment for it. At around 18, he decided to leave home and travel around San Francisco. His aunt gave him some money to get him started. He would jump the trains, and night times he would break into a cabin to sleep. One night he broke into a cabin he thought was empty, and it wasn't. Earl was arrested and taken to court and was sentenced to 2 years in St. Quentin prison. When he was released from prison, he joined the military. Unfortunately, no one liked him in the military. The other sodders thought he was a bit strange. He would keep the boys awake at night talking to things that wasn't there and reciting scriptures speaking mainly about the beast. This scared the boys, so nobody said anything to him. One day the sergeant put him on night watch. Earl didn't like being on watch, so he ran away. If nobody looked for him, they didn't want him back. He then joined the Navy. He did the same things there as he did in the military. However, the Navy had him put into NAFA, a state mental hospital. Earl escaped from there twice and they got him back, but on the third time they just let him go. Earl went back to his Aunt Lillian and she helped him. She got him a job as a custodian in the hospital. He met a woman known as Mary Martin. It wasn't long before they got married in August 1919. She was 58 and he was 22. He would be very aggressive to Mary when they had sex. And the next morning he would be okay to he again. While at work, Earl had another accident. He fell off a ladder and hit his head. He was in a coma for 3 days. When he woke up, he would insist his name was Earl, and he was on the run not only from the military but also the Navy. Mary was very confused. When Earl felt okay, he left Mary. At this time, Mary tried to get a divorce, but she needed to know where he was, and she couldn't find him. Earl was traveling around San Francisco. One Earl decided to knock on the door of the Summer family. A young man answered the front door. Earl said to the young man, whose name was Charles, that he needed to check the mains. This way, said Charles as he walked ahead of Earl. As they walked down to the cellar, Earl noticed a 12-year-old girl playing with her toys. There you are, said Charles as he walked away. As he got to the other end of the house, he heard his sister screaming. He ran back to her room. As he went through the door, he saw Earl trying to sexually assault her. He ran up to her and punched him in the face. Blood squirted out everywhere. Earl ran as fast as he could out of the front door. Charles was running after him, but after a while he lost him. But 2 hours later, someone at the scene pointed him out to the police, and Earl was arrested and charged with sexual assault. 5 years later, at 1:30 on February 1926, Earl, who called himself Roger, knocked on the door of 60-year-old Claire Newman. He was responding to a ad for a room to rent. Claire answered the door. Earl asked about the room. Claire said, "This way, sir." With that, he grabbed her around the throat. He squeezed her neck so hard as the life drained from her. He dragged her to an empty room. He pulled up her skirt and pulled down her knickers. When he did all that he wanted to, he pulled all the clothes off the lifeless body, and he pushed himself in the dead core until he had enough of the bruised and beaten body of poor Claire. On his way back downstairs, he saw a young man standing on the stairs. It was Claire's nephew. Earl said he'd come back later for the room, as he basically ran out the front door. After a little while, Claire's nephew went upstairs to see what had happened to his aunt. As he opened the bedroom door, he got the shock of his life as he gazed upon his beaten-necked aunt. He ran downstairs and alerted the authorities. 2 weeks later, on March 2, 1926, 65-year-old Laura was found by her husband in an empty apartment that the couple owned. She had been strangled by the belt from her robe. Again, she had been sexually assaulted and penetrated after she was dead. From 1926 to 1927, Earl was connected to 22 murders, mainly landladies. June 10th, he killed another landlady. Earl knocked the door. She answers it. He asked about the room. She let him in. He grabbed her. He pulled her down and knelt on her while he strangled her. When she was found, she had 6 broken ribs, and again she was sexually assaulted and penetrated. At this time, the papers named Earl as the Dark Strangler. 66-year-old landlady. The next day, he attacked a pregnant woman in her home in California. She screamed and fought him off. The neighbors heard her screaming and came out to help, but Earl got away. The authorities were alerted, and they now had a description to go by. His next victim in Washington, a 48-year-old widow, was beaten and strangled in the basement of her home. 2 months later, in Council Block, Iowa, a 48-year-old woman was murdered. 3 victims was murdered in Kansas, Missouri. 2 were landladies in their 20s. One of them had a 8-month-old baby, which Earl strangled. Then Earl made his way to Westwood Field, Pennsylvania, where he killed a 60-year-old woman. Then he went to Buffalo, where he beat and strangled a 35-year-old woman. June 1, 1927, he strangled 2 women in Detroit. 2 days after that, he went to Chicago, where he murdered a 32-year-old. In the papers, it said that women just let him in, and then he pounced upon them straight away. It was reported that Earl got a lift out of the country to the Canadian border. June 8, 1927, in Winnipeg, a 14-year-old girl was selling flowers. It's believed she came across Earl. It was the last time anyone saw her alive again. On June 10th, he murdered a 27-year-old landlady. He beat her to death with a hammer. The authorities searched all the lodge houses in Winnipeg, and when they came to the last one, they found the 14-year-old stuffed under a mattress in one of the bedrooms. June 13th, 1927, in Winnipeg, the authorities were offering a $1,500 reward for any information about the murders and the Dark Strangler whereabouts. Earl left Winnipeg and traveled through the countryside. On June 5, he came across a small town named Winecup. He went into a store. The owner recognized him from a photo that was pinned up and phoned the authority. The officer came really quick. They arrested Earl, but Earl insisted that his name was Virgil Wilson. He was placed in a cell and handcuffed to the bars. When the officer left him alone, he removed a nail from the cell cart and used it to pick the lock, and he escaped. He made his way to the train station and hid inside the grain elevator. The next day he tried to catch a train. He was recognized by someone who alerted the guard who sent for the authority. When the train arrived, Earl was going to catch. It was full of Winnipeg officers looking for him. He was arrested. His photo and prints were taken and sent all over America. Straight away the photo and prints were connected to all the murders. He was apprehended on the 16th of June 1920. He was sentenced to death and executed on the 13th of January 1928. Age 30, the papers named him as the Dark Strangler, the Gorilla Man. Names: he called himself Charles Harrison, Adrian Harrison, and Virgil Wilson.